Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on the time that you watch this video. I want to say welcome, and it's been a while that I have not done a live, and but I'm glad to be back. I'm excited about right now to be able to share with you a topic that I think is very much needed. And it's not, you can never speak enough about peace. And today is a little different because um, I've never really, in all honesty, I've never looked up the definition of peace. And I've been doing some studying and reading and then just through everyday life, I I kind of stumbled in my study time as I'm going through the Bible. I stumbled into some scriptures that led me to talk about peace. But before I get into that, Cafe 10, I have my coffee. This is a big one. This one says, I will do big things. Positive affirmation. I love mugs. If you've been on, you'll notice I like to come on in the evening and I like to have something hot to drink, and usually it's my coffee. And some people will ask me, does it keep you up? And it doesn't. Actually, when I do a live, what keeps me awake is the adrenaline from me sharing and um, imparting that it takes me a while to kind of come down from that high to finally get sleepy. And you might say it's the coffee, but I know that it's not because sometimes I don't finish the hookup. This is a big one and all, but I just love something hot. And if it's not a cup of tea, it's coffee. So I hope you take a minute, grab something to drink. If not, I want to share with you this topic about peace. And as you can see in the thumbnail, it says find your peace. And I title it that way because we really have a responsibility for nurturing an atmosphere and an environment of peace. Sometimes we tend to wait and expect to find the sense of feeling happy, the sense of feeling joy, and we confuse it with peace. But having peace does not mean that there's no chaos, doesn't mean that there's no confusion, doesn't mean, it just means that when we are faced with life, that we're not overwhelmed. Now, in the Bible, there's different meanings depending on the scripture, but there's different meanings of the word peace. And the one that I want to focus on is right relationships. And that is so important. Today, it was important. Yesterday, it's going to forever be important because, and vital in our lives, because if we don't nurture the right type of relationships, then we're going to think that peace can never be found, that we always have to be in chaos, there always has to be arguments, there always has to be conflict, and those things will always exist. But I am responsible for what I allow in my space. Now, what space am I talking about? I'm talking about your space in your heart, your space in your soul, your space in your home, your space in your cubicle. Doesn't mean that we shut people out. Doesn't mean that we become loners. It doesn't mean that I have to forget that that I need someone's help, or that I can no longer be vulnerable. That's not a true sense of even living. Vulnerability is part of us being alive because we have our emotions and our feelings. So we're always going to be experience some type of emotion, whether it's positive or negative, but how we handle it has a lot to do on where, if I've allowed or cultivated the presence of peace. Now, if I'm talking about peace, because if I'm speaking about the peace that God gives. Now, the world talks about it having peace and world peace and and finding peace in people and the things that are not eternal. And the problem with that is that when we find peace in people, when we fabricate the sense of a presence without chaos and confusion, we will be disappointed because that's temporary. Now, what does that look like? Um, if we go through life thinking that everything is um, happy go lucky, people that we meet on a day to day, sometimes we work with every day, and every single day they're laughing and bubbly and laughing and bubbly. I don't always think that's realistic, um, because there are people who suffer in silence, and they suffer in silence because they don't know how to handle the chaos that's around them. So they may have a lot of people, a lot of friends, and never have the sense of peace. One, because there's probably an absence of God's presence. And two, because they fabricated that emotion to be emotional and not spiritual. So, the type of relationships that we build, the type of people that we attract, we should be aware of who they are, where they come from, what are they bringing to the relationship if you're going to build a relationship with that person, and whether a romantic relationship or just a brand new friendship. One thing that I have learned, and the more I live, the more I realize that this thing that we call today triggers, and there are things that will trigger us, and because they trigger us, because there's a negative effect. Now, you can be going about your business, just feeling good about the day, and all of a sudden you come across a person that just their response or their reaction kind of rubs you the wrong way, and you're not trying to build a relationship with them. It's just maybe you work with them on the day to day, but this time there was more interaction. What I have found is that the more we interact with people, the more we find out even who we are. And even in those areas, if I am triggered in a certain area, what I've learned is to stop and take the time, even after I react, especially when I react versus respond to the behavior of the other person. I realized that if that triggered me, then that hit a spot that yet has not been healed, has not been corrected. So, in that moment, if it distracts me so to the place where my peace is disrupted, then that's worth looking at. That's worth taking the time, because we are constantly, anytime we pretend that life is great and it's not. I would much rather face the the issue and the situation, and I don't even have to do it in front of people. People don't have to know what I'm going through or what I'm facing. But if I'm honest enough with myself when I am alone, and I take the time to revisit those things and those issues in my heart, then I that's those are the first steps to begin to cultivate peace, because I can be a carrier of peace, especially if I have the right relationship with God. Then I'm going to want to mature to a place where I also have right relationships, working relationships, romantic relationships, family relationships, anything that involves another person in my space. I am responsible for how far, or I'm responsible for the boundaries. I'm responsible to go back and check on those boundaries, kind of take inventory to make sure that I've overcome certain boundaries and they don't become a fortress where I begin to build a safety net for myself, because that's fabricated peace. When I purposely and intentionally pull away from people because I experienced a trigger, it reminded me of something that happened in the past with someone else, and I run from that, then that's not cultivating the peace that God says we should cultivate. So what ends up happening is that I really do end up in a dark place, because now I'm running from something that I need to heal from and be made whole. So one of the definitions for peace is changing the environment, a changed environment. So if within the environment of my own space of myself, if I can't be alone and be at peace, with where my mind is not racing and my heart is just not uh, troubled, because we can be in that space where even our heart is troubled and our mind is racing and there's so much going on that we can't be still within our spirit, then there's no peace. We can be in a place of hurt. We can be in a place where if we experience a loss, if we recently had a breakup, a divorce, a death, anything of that nature that has affected our spirit, our soul, and our heart is broken. Yes, those are natural responses to what's going on in life around you. However, there's also with that and with God's help that we can have peace. And what does that look like? What that looks like is my mind is not racing, that I can cry, but I know that there's hope. Where there's no hope, there's no peace. So peace allows us, the peace that God gives us hope that this pain and this ache and this hurt and this rejection is going to be healed, that I don't, this is a temporary place for me. It's a short season. It doesn't have to be a long season. And time doesn't heal those things. But if, we can ask ourselves, where can I find that peace? When will that peace come? Well, one of the things that I can say is, if it has to do with some affliction, it has to do with some hurt, has to do with some rejection, is to find a way to heal from that, so that you no longer give your mind and your thoughts permission to overshadow the joy that God will give you and the peace that he has given you. And if you're not a believer and that God is the one that gives peace, then you will always, or it'll be more challenging, because the only one that can make us whole and heal our hearts and renew our minds is through Jesus Christ. We can go to counseling, and that's great. I've been through counseling before, previously, and I wasn't ever totally against counseling, but what I find with counseling is that if you don't share and you're not vulnerable, if you're not willing to be vulnerable and you're not willing to open up, then it defeats the purpose. So again, even if through counseling you have an opportunity to share and to open up and be vulnerable with that person, with your counselor, that's a start to ultimately get to the place where you can experience the fullness of the type of peace that God gives. And it helps our relationships. It helps us to prepare. One of the things that I do find, even as I speak to different women, different ages, is that it's always, there always seems to be this narrative that it's someone else's fault. That because of, and I get that, because I've been there, I've experienced that, where even within myself, I am blaming the last person, I am blaming the last relationship, but eventually I had to come back around to realize for myself that I can't control what other people do. I can't even control what other people do to me, but I can control what I allow to live in my personal space. That I can control. So I can set those boundaries and set realistic boundaries and live within those boundaries. But then I also don't want to, and I've done it in the past where I place certain boundaries in place, and then it became a fortress, and then that became my safety net and my safety place, the place where, I mean, I was boxed in and I had no clue. And believe it or not, it took another relationship for me to realize that I was living in a box, because I never went back to check to see if I had matured from those boundaries. I just continued to stay there. And I was, you're going through life, but until you come into a new type of relationship, a new friend, especially if it depends on what type, of course, if it's something you went through that has to do with a friend, but if it's a marriage and you go through a divorce and a breakup and then you set those boundaries, but you never go back to see if you've already matured out of that space, and then you come into another relationship and boy, you're talking about triggers. Talk about things just kind of rubbing you the wrong way. I remember facing that and I thought, what is this thing? And again, that there's no peace, but there wasn't. My peace was disrupted. What I thought and I'm not gonna say I fabricated, because I love being in a place where it's peaceful. There's times that I don't want the TV on, just maybe some soft music, or sometimes just complete quietness. I am okay with that, with it being totally quiet. But I have my grandchildren, so sometimes when I'm even around my grandchildren, they don't bother me, but I'm in a place of peace. And I've been where there has been turmoil, there's been problems and issues where I'm around other people and my mind is just going and my heart is just racing, and that situation just continues to go through my mind, and over and over and over again, there's no peace. So I can tell the difference. But when I'm triggered about something, if something just messes with my peace, if something messes with that, then I have to stop and take a look. Okay, why is it? Why is that bothering me? Or why did I respond that way? Or why did I react? And sometimes it just could be whatever's happening in the day, but it's worth taking the time to take a look at. Don't ignore those triggers. Don't sit in a place of being hurt and replaying that rejection. I could have done this. I should have done that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you could have, should have been able to do. The point is this is where you are now. And you can take responsibility. You can take a look at, and that's probably the best place to start, is to take a look at deep down inside. Deep down inside, not for you to convict and blame and find blame within yourself, but looking deep down inside so that you can begin the process to heal. Right now, I think we deal with too many women, young and old, and I'm speaking to women, young and old, that are they're broken, they're hurt, have not gotten past the last bad breakup or a death in the family, whatever trauma has taken place in their life, they have not dealt with it. And even though, and sometimes they're not, it doesn't have to be something that is recent. Sometimes it's of years that have gone by, and you haven't dealt with that hurt. You haven't dealt with the rejection. Your heart is still broken, even though years have gone by. When you see a thing that still reminds you, it still triggers you because of the trauma that you face. It is time to, I'm not just going to say let it go, because you can't just let it go, but it is time to try to find your peace, to try to find it through a process of healing. Try to find it through a process of being made whole again. so that you will know what it feels like to love again, to care again from a place of wholeness, not just from a place of, definitely not from a place of brokenness, because we can't give what we don't have. So if I don't have peace, I can't give peace. And that is hard when we're in the season of raising children, when we're in a place where our children are depending on us and they're pulling from us emotionally. We have to we have to make an effort, be intentional about allowing God to come in and heal that place, and those wounds that run deep. Actually, what ends up happening if the sooner we deal with the hurt and the rejection, the 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 sooner we can move on, and not necessarily move on to another relationship, but we can definitely begin that process of healing. But traumas are like roots. If they're not dealt with, and they go deep, and then they're harder. Think about a tree, a tree that you may have planted maybe about a month ago. You can still easily go and pick it up and pull it up and move it somewhere else. But a tree that has been planted for years, an old tree, an oak tree that's been there for 20, 25 years, it's not going anywhere. And the roots have already begun to come to the surface, and they've gone deep and they've gone wide, and it's harder. So the sooner we deal with those things, the sooner we are able to begin to go through that process of healing. And the amazing thing about peace and about God's peace is that I don't have to be 100% to experience His peace. I can go through the process, and that's allotted, whatever the time is, and go through it with peace, where there's a contentment, where there's the arguments are easily shut down. The arguments in our minds are shut down. The thoughts, the negativity, you can easily conquer that because you've been able to experience the ultimate peace that only God can give. So no matter what you're facing, no matter where you are, do know that God is always ready. He is the Prince of Peace. He is ready to come and bring change in your heart, renew your mind. Because then if we do not begin that process, then we're going to afflict and hurt somebody else. It's going to be a ripple effect in our jobs, in our family, in our relationships. Many that are married and they're still together and they're under the same roof, there's no peace because something may have happened, something traumatic may have happened either in the relationship individually or within the marriage, within that relationship, and it's never been dealt with. Kind of shoved it under the rug, put it in a closet somewhere, and shut the door, kind of like that junk drawer. I keep one of those. I don't keep junk. I call it a junk drawer, but I keep everything that like pins, a screwdriver, things that are easy to get to, and all. And if it's, I'm not embarrassed for anybody to open it up, but if you have those closets, and I don't have a closet like that either because I like myself to be organized, but nonetheless, our minds and we create these compartments. We compartmentalize our thoughts and even our hearts. So there are certain things in our heart that we think, okay, I'm just going to tuck that away. I'm not going to mess with that. And we think that it's not going to come up somewhere. And it does. One day it appears. What are you going to do with that one thing that you have hidden? And that may be that one thing that needs to be dealt with so you can totally experience the peace of God, so that you can grow emotionally. That's why we struggle with having and going into new relationships. I've been divorced twice, and don't say it proudly, I and what have you, but that's just a fact. I was divorced for 17 years after the divorce of my husband, the father of my daughters, and all. After 17 years, I remarried. And I certainly did not remarry so that I can go through a divorce again. But I did, and those are other stories and all. But having to go through the healing process without having total peace. And with the peace that God gave me, what it brought to me was hope. Because in the place of peace, but when I didn't feel the complete process, because it's a spiritual battle. When I could not experience just the fullness of the peace of God was when it was the hardest thing, because thoughts in your mind and even your dreams are affected, and you're going forward, but I had hope that that part of it, as I was maturing, and the only way to mature emotionally is for us to go through the process. And many of us give up halfway. And because time goes on, and there does come a time where we just kind of feel pretty good. It's kind of like when they give you that 10-day penicillin, and after the second day you feel good, you're ready to go to work, and you move out too quickly. That happens to us even in the natural sense. We come out of one relationship, and there's not a process for us to even encounter God for ourselves, begin to experience it. The minute we begin to feel pretty good, we think that we're ready to let our guard down. If we had guards, some of us don't even put any guards up. That's a little scary. Some of us don't put any boundaries. That's very scary. We just are looking to feel good. I want this to go away. And because we feel good, we confuse it for being healed. And we are so far away. I personally think that, I don't know, I was thinking to myself, okay, when I was divorced, when I was married the first time after, and I made a conscious decision to, to stay single, raise my daughters, and what have you. But there there was a time that I would think, okay, if I meet somebody or when that day comes, and as I got older, I had to realize, okay, it's going to be probably someone who's been married before. What are going to be some of those boundaries? And I remember thinking to myself, okay, if he happened to be divorced, okay, 5 years in, he should be good emotionally, mentally, and what have you. Well, neither one took place. It wasn't 5 years. It was a lot sooner, and it turned out to be not good because of certain details. Again, that's a whole other story and teaching, whatever, and what have you. But there wasn't definitely not the peace that God would give, and for many reasons. Um, and for me, even though I had been divorced for so long, I didn't have any past divorce issues, but there was this one thing that happened, and years after I was already divorced, that happened and took place, and I didn't deal with it. And lo and behold, that thing followed me. And I did not know, I did not have a clue that that was even an issue until after the second divorce. Because there are things that we don't ask God to show us when we're in the middle. And that's why we don't encounter, and we can never find that peace, because we just want things, we just want the pain to go away. We don't want to know why. We don't want to know how. We don't want to go through the process. Just go away. So the minute it goes away, we think we're okay and we move out too soon. And what ends up happening is that not only do we risk us being broken again, but we break somebody else because we're not healthy. And along the way, and it's mainly in the space, in the romantic space and all. But when you really look about it, when we take a look at it, when you consider it, um, it also affects the people we work with. It affects our family. But it's more noticeable when we enter into a romantic relationship, and that's usually where we find it. But many a times, if we look back, it's also, if our romantic relationship, my relationship with my husband, my boyfriend, my fiance, whatever, if there's a lot of rift in that, then everything else relationally is affected. outside of the romantic part. But we tend to just pay more attention to the romance part because that feels good. But we ignore the relationship with our children, with our immediate family members, siblings, parents, our coworkers, not realizing that it still starts, and it starts with me, it starts with us. How's my relationship with me? Do I love myself enough to find the help that I need to be made whole? Do I love myself enough to say no more? I'm going to stop fabricating. I'm going to stop pretending. I'm going to stop running to temporary things to make me feel good and call it peace. I'm going to stop pretending. I'm going to stop just talking about it, and I'm going to take action. I'm responsible for that. No one can give me any of that. No one can decide that for me. Because even if my family and my friends and my spouse, my boyfriend, even if they decide that for me, I'm the one that has to do it. No one can do that for me. No one can do that for you. There's a conscious decision that we have to make. And many of us that are moms that are not stepping up to the position of being that mother who says, if I don't do it for me, I'll do it for my children. I remember being in that place, making some hard decisions, but they were not hard. The only reason they were easy was because it was for my daughters. But then the time came where I had to learn to do it for me, where God was holding me accountable. And whether we believe it or not, God holds us all accountable. Whether you believe in God or not, it's not a matter of whether you believe or not. It's just fact. So we have a choice. And I'm not condemning anybody. You know, you have a choice. You still have a choice. If you don't believe in God, okay, don't. But still, you have a choice to get well, to heal, to really find and make a decision to say, no more. I will no longer hurt anyone else because I'm going to make sure that I'm no longer hurting. And sometimes we do it when we're in that space. I remember when we're in that space, let me finish my sentence. When we're in that space of overcoming a disappointment, because it can be at different levels. When we're in that place, we don't realize that it's affecting other people because it's hard for us to see. There's a lens, there's a veil that hasn't been removed because of the trauma that we've experienced. But the minute we begin to take the first step to get that healing, is that things begin to unveil. And then sometimes some things are things that you're like, wow, I didn't know that was there. I didn't know that happened. I forgot that took place. I forgot that. And it feels so good to be able to see it and recognize it and know that now I can deal with it. Yeah, it's amazing. It's life-giving because it's no longer a burden. It's no longer a burden. So some things we can't stop life. Life will happen, but we can definitely take matters into our own hands and make a decision to ask God to make us whole, to begin to journal, to seek out a counselor. There's so much available today. And I believe that in doing those things, we will be able to overcome depression. We will be able to overcome loneliness, all those emotional places of darkness. When the light is turned on, where we have revelation, where we realize what has been holding us back for so long. Oh my gosh, it's a breath of fresh air. And I'm not just saying that. What I'm sharing is what I've experienced. It's one thing is to face one divorce and one breakup, and then to face another one. It was devastating to me because I consider myself to be a person who is committed, who makes a commitment. But there were so many factors that took place that, I look back and think, wow, in 17 years, but it didn't have anything to do with that immediately with that divorce, but it did have to do with the disappointment that I faced and that I did not deal with. And it affected the next relationship. And I couldn't believe it. Some things that I saw afterwards, I'm like, God, you couldn't show me this beforehand, but I wouldn't have done anything. So sometimes it takes a relationship. Sometimes it takes meeting a new friend, meeting a new boyfriend, anything that's going to require for us to give up ourselves. Sometimes it takes that to be able to kind of bring some triggers to figure out, oh my gosh, that is still bothering me. And if it does, do not ignore it. It's time to deal with it. So my prayer for you tonight is that God will show himself as the Prince of Peace where you are right now. If you open up your heart, you open up your heart to who God is, he will show up. And read Romans 5:1. I didn't read any scripture today. I didn't intend to, but two things I do want to share before we go. One is that, yes, we have to have establish a right relationship with God. Two is take responsibility, and then ask yourself these questions: who do I allow in my space? Who have I given permission in my space to affect me? And what do I allow? What have I allowed in my space that is disrupting my peace? It's brought chaos, it's brought confusion. Have I set those boundaries yet? On our own, we don't have enough courage. But consider those things. Ask yourself those questions. And if you want peace, change your environment. If you can, find a way to change your environment slowly. You have to go cut everything and everybody off. Some you do. Some things you have to just cut off and begin the healing process so you can experience the ultimate peace of God. But ask yourself those questions. And I'll tell you, I guarantee you'll be a lot better because you'll heal. You'll recognize those things. Is there a process to go through? Certainly, and everybody's different. Everyone's process is different. But your process is your process, and mine was mine. The thing is to end with the same result, and that is in a place of peace, so that our children's children, we can build a legacy of being a family and a home of peace wherever we go, in our jobs, wherever we are, in our homes with our families, that we can experience that the wholeness of what peace is. So I pray that you have a great night. I went past I'm trying to keep it about 20 minutes or so, but nonetheless, it's about 38 minutes. But nonetheless, it feels good to be back, to once again be able to share with you some of the things that God has been giving me and he's placed in my heart. You are amazing. Please believe that. Say it to yourself if no one else tells you that, and know that God made no mistake when he made you and I. And there is divine purpose in everything that we do. There is a reason behind it, means that there is a purpose. If you're still here, there is somebody you need to impact. So be intentional with the things that you do, especially with the things of God. Be intentional, and you will not be disappointed. So I pray that God blesses you and keeps you, And until tomorrow night, good night.